There are no bad GPUs. Let me just say that right from the get-go. There's only bad pricing and bad positioning. So if you were heavily anticipating the launch of the RTX 50 series from NVIDIA and the RTX 5090 at $2,000 seemed a bit rich for your blood, you might have had your sights set on the relatively less expensive $1,000 RTX 5080. But if you've been watching the launch reviews that came out today, you might be thinking, whoa, hold on a second, why do all these reviewers think this GPU sucks? This video is meant to explain the reasoning as simply as possible. The RTX 5080 does not suck as a GPU. It sucks in terms of pricing, it sucks in terms of positioning, it sucks in terms of the value it offers, especially if you compare it to previous generations, but most importantly, I think it sucks because it represents how NVIDIA is treating PC gamers in 2025, especially considering how well they've been doing in recent years.
Excellent!
Today's video is brought to you by the Paul's Hardware store on paulshardware.net, the only official source for Paul's Hardware merchandise. Tantalizing t-shirts, brilliant beer sets, high-quality hoodies, and more, all featuring the classic thumbscrew for tasteful and refined viewers, or the 8-bit thumbscrew for tasteful and refined viewers who hate curves. New designs are added sporadically and at random, so head over to paulshardware.net and get some of that sweet, sweet merch right now. Or not right now, after you watch the video. Either way. So I want to point out that this is not a review video. I'm doing things a little bit differently this time around for the RTX 50 series launch. But let's start out with some context. If you watch my YouTube channel, there's a reasonable chance that you enjoy building computers. And there's lots of reasons to build your own computer. I like to do it because it's fun, but also because of upgrades. You can build a system now, you can upgrade it in the future. So PC builders are always on the lookout for what's coming next, because often, historically, when something comes out that's new, we get a boost in performance. And often we get parts that come out that cost less money, they give more performance, and I often compare that to when I used to play World of Warcraft. When a new expansion would come out, your current armor set, no matter how much time you had spent gathering it and putting it together to be the best in slot in every single category, when the next expansion comes out, chances are the entry-level items there are going to outperform your epic gear. And it's often been a similar case when new generations of GPUs launch. The mid-tier offerings from the next gen will typically outperform even the best GPU that was available from the previous generation. Now, I'm not intending this video to be too focused on Moore's Law, because there's certainly discussion to be had there, but whether the advancements came from manufacturing process improvements or GPU microarchitecture advancements, each generation there's more performance, and the performance improvement is usually split up a little bit. You get a little bit more value on the GPU side, so those prices would typically go up a little bit each generation, but you also get a big boost in sort of free performance for the consumer that you got just by waiting for the next generation to launch. But I'm talking about historical context here, and that's what's very important for this video. If you go back 10 plus years or so ago to the GTX 700 series, this was when NVIDIA first launched Titan class GPUs, and this was, in my opinion, when NVIDIA started a long-term strategy, first off using price anchoring with those Halo tier cards to gradually increase the perceived value of their cards, but also treating that gen-on-gen performance increase a little bit differently. If you're offering more performance, you're offering more value. So why should NVIDIA be giving consumers free performance with just a generational upgrade, when instead they should just be charging consumers proportionally for that increased performance? And that was first heavily represented with the RTX 20 series launch, and the way NVIDIA stacked the pricing of those cards on top of the existing cards that were already out, rather than replacing them with higher performing models. But instead of just talking about this, why don't I show you with some actual performance numbers, taking a trip back in time to September 2014 when the GTX 980 launched. And the performance data here is sourced from the Tech Power Up database. Other than the launch date and the MSRP, which is $550 for the 980, we have comparisons to the card that's 2 generations old in the 80 class, the last gen card in the 80 class, and the last generation flagship. The 80 class card 2 generations before the 980 was actually the 680, because they skipped the 800 series. The 680 was actually a pretty beastly card, but the 980 was still 71% faster. Then compared to the last gen 780, it was 38% faster, and versus the 780 Ti, the previous generation flagship, it was 11% faster. In the next generation, the 80 class card was a GTX 1080, which sold for $600 MSRP and launched in May 2016. Versus the 2 gens old 780, the 1080 was a 109% performance boost. Versus the last gen 980, it was 51% faster. And even versus the previous generation flagship 980 Ti, it was a 31% performance increase. So here you can see that anyone who invested in the 10 series, the 1080 in particular, was getting a pretty decent performance bump, and it was only $50 more expensive. A couple years later, in September 2018, the RTX 2080 launched. This was the advent of the R series ray tracing cards, and also Nvidia increased the MSRP to $700 from $600, much to the chagrin of many reviewers. So some value was lost due to that price increase, but we still had a pretty decent performance bump. Compared to the GTX 980, the 2080 was 110% faster. Compared to the GTX 1080, it was 39% faster. And even compared to the venerable GTX 1080 Ti, it was 9% faster. A couple years after that, in September 2020, we had the debut of the RTX 3080, which also sold for $700, or at least it was supposed to. If you guys remember, the RTX 3080 was actually a great deal for $700, but it rarely sold for that much, but this was also heavily influenced by cryptocurrency mining. Still, compared to the 2 generations old GTX 1080, we had a 126% performance improvement. Compared to the RTX 2080, we were 63% faster, and compared to the 2080 Ti, 36% performance gen on gen versus the last gen flagship, and that is good. That's a good representation of a gen on gen performance uplift for a 80 class card versus the last gen flagship. And despite the 20 series only coming in at 9%, this was what had been the standard for quite some time prior to that. On my next line here, I'm adding 2 cards, the RTX 4080 and the 4080 Super. Even though they were separated by a year and a half or so from September 2022 to January 2024, the 4080 Super, in my opinion, is what the 4080 should have been, and that is the card that we should be comparing the 5080 to, or the 5092 for that matter. That said, I listed them both here so we can compare both. The 4080 came out for $1,200. The 4080 Super was a price reduction down to $1,000 despite being a little bit faster. So versus the 2080, they were about 143 and 147% faster. Versus the RTX 3080, they were about 50% faster. And versus the last gen flagship 3090 Ti, about 12 and 14% improved. So looking at this chart through 2024, we can see a lot of green. We can see typically over 100% performance increase versus the 2 gens old card, healthy double-digit performance increases versus last generation, and even versus the last gen flagship, we're always in the green, sometimes 10%, sometimes 30% or more. So now let's add the RTX 5080. Eek! I'm using supplemental data here from Hardware Unboxed, the 4K cumulative benchmarks, and we only have a 65% improvement for the 5080 versus the 3080, less than half of what we've typically gotten in previous generations, only an 11% performance increase versus the 4080 Super, and that is being generous. If you check out some other reviews, and I've listed multiple ones in the description down below, it sometimes is less than 10%. And versus the RTX 4090, we're in the red. We're at negative 17%. And if you're looking at that and saying, well, last gen flagship 4090 was sort of a unicorn and it stood on its own and it was that much more expensive because of the increased performance, that is part of Nvidia's strategy. They want to make the Halo tier card look really good in terms of performance, but also be super expensive to establish that luxury brand pricing. And then for anyone who doesn't want to cough up $2,000 or more, well, your step down from that is going to be a very disappointing experience if you're looking at the historical context. Speaking of which, I have one more graph to show you here, just showing the progress over time, where we can see pricing has continued to go up while relative performance has continued to go down, which means anyone who doesn't want to pay that premium tier pricing is going to be punished because of it. Now in particular, if you look towards the end of this chart, just in the past, say 3, 4, 5 years, you can see what a price increase Nvidia has tacked on to the RTX 80 class card, and I would compare that to how Nvidia has been doing in that same period of time. Their value as a company has skyrocketed. They're doing quite well. And I know businesses are going to business, and that's just how the world works, and we have to deal with it. But it's frustrating knowing that Nvidia started as a company for PC gaming, making graphics cards to play video games with, and they've come a long way. They wouldn't have come this far without PC gamers buying their products and supporting them. AI is a whole other animal, and they're doing great over there. They've had much success, but it really sucks when it comes to their GeForce lineup and the cards that they still make for gamers. It seems like they're trying to extract the maximum amount of profit from PC gamers while providing the minimum viable product, and that, after so long, is just disappointing. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you want some links to some full reviews, check those in the video description down below. And also, if you'd like to help support my channel, you can check out my store at paulshardware.net, where I have shirts, mugs, pint glasses, and all manner of high quality merchandise. Thank you so much for watching once again, and we'll see you all in the next video.